It was one of those warm summer afternoons in Maplewood, where the sun shone brightly and the scent of freshly cut grass lingered in the air. We were all at Jake's house, gathered in the living room, surrounded by laughter and playful banter. The golden sunlight poured through the window, creating a cozy atmosphere, but there was something inside me that I couldn't ignore, a shadow of anxiety spreading in the back of my mind. "Do you guys remember the Well of Shadows?" Jake asked, breaking the lightness of the moment. He was sitting on the couch, his eyes sparkling with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The name of the well made my heart race. The legends about that haunted place had always been present in our childhood, but now, as teenagers, the idea of exploring it felt both tempting and terrifying at the same time. "Oh, come on, Jake. That's just a story to scare kids," Emily replied, rolling her eyes. She was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, her light brown hair falling in waves over her shoulders. She was always the one trying to dismiss the darker ideas, but I could see a glimmer of concern in her eyes. "But what if it's true?" Mike, always the boldest of the group, provoked, leaning forward as if trying to instigate all of us. "Just imagine. What could happen if we went there? It would be epic." "Epicness isn't exactly what I'm looking for, Mike," Tyler murmured, crossing his arms. He was more reserved, and the idea of descending into a place shrouded in mystery didn't seem to appeal to him. "How many people have disappeared there?" "Oh, stop it," Jake said, trying to sound confident. "Let's have some fun. What could go wrong? We're a strong group, and we're together. Let's go down and see what really happens." "I don't know, Jake," I said, my voice a little hesitant. "These stories aren't just tales. Some people talk about things they saw down there, things that shouldn't be seen." "Are you scared, Sarah?" Mike teased, a challenging smile on his face. "I knew you were the most afraid of us." I took a deep breath, trying to push away the growing sense of nervousness. "It's not fear, it's caution. What if something actually happens? Look, let's stop this nonsense," Jake said, standing up and moving closer to us. "If you don't go, I'll go alone. What do you all think? Let's go together, and if something happens, we'll stick together and face it." Emily looked at me and then at the others, a doubtful expression on her face. "Maybe we should at least think this through before making a decision." "Think? I thought we were here to act," Jake replied, his voice resonating with the determination of a leader. "Come on. What do you have to lose?" The pressure was mounting, and I knew everyone was feeling a bit uncomfortable. But, somewhere inside me, curiosity began to mix with fear. What really lay at the bottom of the Well of Shadows? I didn't want to be the only one not going, the only one left behind while everyone else ventured forth. And deep down, there was a part of me that longed to discover what was hidden there. Okay. Let's go," I finally said, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. "But if something happens, you're responsible, Jake." He smiled, satisfied with our decision. "Perfect. Then let's get ready." The group quickly organized themselves, grabbing flashlights and water. The atmosphere of excitement began to take hold, and despite the butterflies in my stomach, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something magical about this adventure. When we arrived at the Well of Shadows, the atmosphere changed drastically. The sun that had once enveloped us now seemed distant. The air was colder, and a deafening silence surrounded us. The vegetation around seemed denser, as if trying to conceal what was about to be revealed. I was in a moment of doubt, but curiosity overcame my fear. "Let's go," Jake said, looking at all of us. "Together, right?" "Sure," Emily replied, her voice a bit shaky. "Just, let's be careful, okay?" Yeah. Careful, caution, and all that boring stuff." Mike joked, but I noticed he was also a bit nervous. Descending into the well felt like entering another world. The echo of our footsteps seemed amplified, and the light from our flashlights danced on the damp walls. The inscriptions on the stones were almost illegible, but we could feel that those walls were filled with stories, lives that might have never returned. "This is different from what I expected," Tyler commented, looking around. He was visibly anxious, his expression that of someone wanting to get out of there as quickly as possible. "I agree," I said, trying to keep calm. "It's more oppressive. And what if we don't come back?" Emily whispered, her eyes wide. "What if those legends are true?" "We'll come back, I promise," Jake said, trying to sound confident. "We just need to explore a little more, and once we have a story to tell, we'll head back." The shadows on the walls seemed to move, and an uncomfortable feeling began to rise in my stomach. "Maybe we should have stayed at the house playing video games," I murmured. "This is nothing compared to the adventures we're going to have," Mike said, though his bravado was starting to wane. As we ventured deeper, I noticed the atmosphere changing. The silence was becoming more oppressive, and an inexplicable chill permeated the air. A shiver ran down my spine, and I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, as if something was watching me. "Jake, you're not scared, are you?" I asked, trying to cling to some hope. "Of course not. This is just an adventure," he replied, but his voice had a hint of uncertainty that didn't go unnoticed. Down there, the darkness seemed to have a life of its own. And as we descended, the feeling that we were being watched intensified. A part of me wanted to turn back, but another part was so intrigued that I couldn't imagine leaving without discovering what lay beneath the surface. Curiosity and fear swirled in an emotional whirlwind, and I knew we were about to cross a line. The Well of Shadows was not merely a place of exploration, it was a portal to something more. And once we crossed that threshold, there would be no turning back. Descending into the Well of Shadows was an impulsive decision, and as our feet touched the wet, dark bottom, a wave of cold swept over my body. The daylight faded, and the darkness thickened around us. I turned to look at my friends, seeking comfort in their faces, but what I saw was a mix of excitement and apprehension. Jake was at the front, his gaze determined, but I could sense the shadow of uncertainty in his expression. "I don't know if this was a good idea," I whispered to Emily, who was next to me. She shot me a nervous glance but forced a smile. "It's going to be fun, you'll see. We're together, right?" But the truth was that the legend of the well still hung over us like a heavy cloud. The stories of people disappearing without a trace echoed in my mind, causing my heart to race. I tried to push those thoughts away, focusing on the inscriptions we were starting to notice on the walls around us. They were strange symbols, almost hypnotic, pulsating with a life of their own. "Look at this!" Jake exclaimed, pointing to a set of inscriptions that appeared more elaborate. "What do you think it means?" "I don't know, but it seems to have something to do with fears," Tyler replied, his hesitant tone reflecting the growing tension among us. "Look how they're organized. It's as if we're being watched." "Maybe it's just our imagination," Mike said with a nervous laugh. "Let's have some fun." What could happen? I wanted to believe he was right, but a part of me knew we were about to discover something I wasn't prepared to face. As we approached the inscriptions, I felt a strange presence, as if something was watching us. The air grew cold, and a deafening silence enveloped the place. The inscriptions seemed to shift, and I moved closer, trying to decipher the symbols. "What do these things say?" Hashtag, I asked, more for myself than for others. "Jake, can you read this?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "No, but it seems like they're talking about fears," he replied, his voice faltering. "Fears that become reality." Suddenly, a shadow moved behind me, and I turned quickly, but saw nothing. "Did you see that?" I asked, panic starting to set in. "What did we see exactly?" Mike asked, with a dismissive air, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "A shadow, something moved." "You're just imagining things," Tyler said, but his tone wasn't very confident. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Let's keep going. We need to understand what's happening here. As we walked, a pressure began to form in my chest. It felt as if the well itself was trying to separate us, making us feel alone. I looked around and realized that even though we were together, each of us was lost in our own thoughts and fears. Emily started to drift away, drawn to an inscription that seemed to glow. "Look at this," she exclaimed, her voice echoing through the space. "What do you think it means?" "Emily, don't wander off," Jake shouted, but his voice sounded distant, as if the shadows were absorbing his words. I followed her, a sense of desperation growing inside me. "Hey, wait!" I yelled, but when I got closer, I saw she was frozen, staring at a figure that had emerged in her mind. "It's him," Emily murmured, her hands trembling. "My ex, why is he here?" The image of her ex-partner hovered in the darkness, and I could see the pain in his eyes. "Emily, you need to step back. This isn't real." But she was trapped, and I felt the shadow of her fears wrap around her, suffocating her. "I can't. I feel so guilty." My heart ached. "You shouldn't feel that way. He can't hurt you anymore." I don't know if I can face this," she whimpered, and a wave of despair washed over her. "You're stronger than you think," I said, trying to convince her. "Remember who you are." At that moment, the walls of the well began to vibrate, and a shadow formed in front of Jake. "No," he shouted, but the figure of his betrayed friend confronted him. I realized that each of us was being attacked by our deepest insecurities. "Jake, don't let it take you," I yelled, but the expression of pain on his face told me he was fighting an internal battle we couldn't see. The shadows began to writhe frantically, and the atmosphere around us grew increasingly oppressive. Tyler stood paralyzed, watching as the shadows approached him, laughing at his insecurities. He tried to back away, but the laughter echoed in his mind. "Tyler, come back," I shouted, but the pressure was too great. "Return to us." But he was lost in his thoughts, and I felt we were drifting further apart. The well seemed to want to separate us, and the shadows were feeding on our fears. "Come on, we need to regroup," Jake shouted, but his voice was filled with despair. "We're in this together," I said, but even so, fear was overtaking us. Emily, still frozen, finally began to move, but not away from the shadow. "I can't take this anymore. I can't deal with it," she murmured, and my heart shattered. "You have to try," I pleaded. "We need to face this together." But the tension was rising and the shadows seemed to take pleasure in our suffering. Each of us was trapped in our own visions, and the feeling of despair was palpable. "I don't know what to do," Tyler cried, his desperate tone cutting through the heavy air. "We need to decipher these inscriptions," Jake insisted, but his confidence was waning. I looked at the walls, trying to find some clue that could help us. "There has to be a way out of here." Then Emily, who finally seemed to be breaking free from her paralysis, turned to us. Maybe we have to confront our fears. Not just run from them." Her words resonated with me. "Yes. We need to face this. If we don't, we'll be trapped here forever." But doubt still hung in the air. What if we can't?" Mike asked, his voice filled with fear. "If we don't try, we'll never know." "We need to unite and confront this together," I said, trying to instill courage in all of us. "I'm with you," Jake affirmed, his determination beginning to shine again. "Me too," Sarah said, her voice stronger. "Then let's go," I declared, feeling a wave of hope. "Let's face these shadows and discover what they really are." As the shadows approached, I knew the only way to overcome them was to confront them head-on. And together, we decided that our fears would not dominate us. The well began to shake, but we stood firm, ready to uncover the truth behind the inscriptions and, more importantly, the truth about ourselves. The pressure at the bottom of the well was almost tangible. The echo of our voices blended with the sound of dripping water, creating a symphony of fear and anxiety. When we separated, each searching to decipher those enigmatic inscriptions, the air grew denser. I could barely concentrate on the marks on the walls as the image of a friend's shadow betrayed me formed in my mind like a nightmare. I looked at Jake, who was just a few steps away, his expression a mix of determination and guilt. I knew he was trying to protect Emily, but that didn't stop him from being consumed by his own insecurities. I remember hearing someone's laughter behind me, but when I turned, there was no one. Just the echo. That laughter seemed to mock me, and my heart raced. What was this place? A labyrinth of shadows feeding on our weaknesses. Jake, are you okay? I asked, trying to pull him back to reality. He stared at me, but there was a glimmer of panic in his eyes that unsettled me. I just need to understand what's happening here, he replied, his voice trembling. I can't let this bring us down. The shadows around us seemed to dance, and I felt a chill run down my spine. That's when, suddenly, the vision began. A figure rose before me, distorted and threatening. It was my best friend, Miguel, but it wasn't really him. It was a version I had never known, a shadow of the past reproaching me. You never cared about your friendships, did you? The shadow said, with a sarcastic smile. Always so focused on competition, on being the best. And where has that led you? To the bottom of a dark well, surrounded by friends you might not deserve. Shut up! I shouted, but my voice echoed back, as if the well was laughing at me. I tried to push the vision away, but it intensified. The weight of guilt began to accumulate in my chest. I fought for you, Miguel. I always fought. Fought? Or did you just want to be the winner? The shadow continued, advancing toward me. You never cared about what really mattered. The air around me grew heavy, and I felt trapped in a cycle of regret. That figure was right, in a way. I always wanted to be the best, and in my pursuit of it, I left many behind. I looked at Jake again, and saw him struggling against his own shadow. He was frozen, his eyes fixed on something that tormented him. Jake, we need to unite. I yelled, but my voice seemed to get lost in the echo of the well. Fear was spreading, and I needed to act quickly. Yet the vision of Miguel's shadow continued to hold me captive. You're not my friend. I'm not who you think I am. The shadow laughed, a deep sound that reverberated through the walls of the well, as if it were feeding on my despair. You think you can just yell and I'll go away? Your true nature can't be hidden. You're afraid of losing everything, and that's what defines you. Then I saw Sarah. She was in a corner, frozen, her eyes wide and full of tears. She looked at me, and I could see the desperation in her gaze. Jake! Help! She screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the pressure surrounding us. Sarah, what's happening? I asked, trying to get closer to her. But before I could reach her, a shadow took form before her. ####, it was the image of her missing sister, with an expression of sadness and disappointment. You should have looked for me, Sarah. You should have fought for me, the shadow said, its voice sounding like a distant echo. You forgot about me, didn't you? And now, you're trapped here because of it. Sarah shrank back, wrapped in a cloak of guilt. No. I tried. I always looked for you, she cried, her voice trembling. I didn't forget you. You didn't do enough, the shadow insisted, advancing toward her. I couldn't bear to see my friend like this. I looked at Jake, who appeared lost in his own internal struggle. Jake! You need to help Sarah. I shouted, the urgency in my voice rising. But he was paralyzed, caught in a conflict I could barely understand. I can't, he replied, his voice low. This shadow, it's everything I feared. I can't leave it behind. It was as if the shadows were feeding off our fears, dividing us instead of uniting us. I knew I had to act, but how could I help my friends when I was fighting my own demons? Sarah, listen. I tried to encourage her. You need to face this. Your sister wants you to remember her, not to feel guilty. Come on, confront the shadow. But Sarah's sister's shadow was getting closer, and the emotional pressure felt overwhelming. Sarah pulled away, her eyes filled with desperation. I can't do this. This made a wave of frustration erupt within me. You're stronger than this. Don't let guilt consume you. We're a group. Together, we can face this. I looked again at Jake, who was still struggling against Miguel's shadow, but his battle was intensifying. I'm not a traitor. Jake shouted at the shadow. But the shadow kept approaching, a figure of reproach that seemed to feed on his insecurities. You're not my friend. You're just a projection of what I feared. Jake, you're stronger than you think. I yelled, trying to pull him back to reality. You're not that. But it was as if we were trapped in our own distorted realities, and I didn't know how to free them. The shadows continued to surround us, each one bringing forth our weaknesses. Mike was quiet, watching everything from a distance. He seemed to be battling his own shadow but couldn't find the words. Mike, you need to join this fight too. I insisted, realizing he was hiding from his truth. You can't isolate yourself. That will only weaken you more. I just can't face this, he murmured, looking at the ground. What I feel for Emily, she'll never see me the same way. And I don't know how to deal with it. It's not just about you, Mike. I said, frustration rising. We're all fighting here. You can't let this bring you down. But Miguel's shadow was approaching Jake, and the pressure was intensifying. I needed to act, to unite us all. I looked at my own shadow and realized that the only way to overcome this was to confront the truth hidden within. You are not your shadows. I shouted to the group. You are more than that. We have to come together and face this. Let's go. Let's confront what haunts us. But the atmosphere was heavy, and I could feel the darkness closing in around us. The voices of our fears became a deafening chorus, and I knew we needed to find a way to reconnect again. Please, look at each other. I pleaded. You're friends. We need to overcome this. Each of you has the power to fight. Jake finally looked at me, and the expression on his face changed. You're right. We can't let this divide us. We need to face it together. Yes. Sarah said, her eyes shining with determination. I can't let my sister's shadow control me. I loved her and always will, but I can't live in guilt. And so, we began to unite, all of us inexorably pulled back together. The power of friendship began to shine amidst the shadows. The visions started to dissipate, and the darkness surrounding us slowly began to recede. The darkness from the bottom of the well seemed to close in around us, as if the stone walls were compressing, and the air became increasingly dense. The silence, which was once merely deafening, was now filled with whispers. I felt my heart racing as I tried to reconnect with the others, but the internal pressure was overwhelming. I looked to the side and saw Jake, his expression of concern mirroring mine. He was trying to keep the group together, but the tension was palpable. We need to stay together, he said, his voice hesitant. We can't split up. What does that mean, Jake? Emily replied, her voice trembling. We're losing control here. The legend speaks of a labyrinth, Tyler added, his gaze fixed on the shadows that seemed to dance around us. If we separate, we may never find each other again. But at the same time, I felt the shadows pulling us, as if they wanted to tear us apart. The idea of facing what was hidden there left me paralyzed. It was as if the well knew our deepest fears and was now using that against us. I looked at the walls, the enigmatic symbols beginning to glow faintly, as if they were alive. It was a call, but a call to the unknown. "Jake, what do you think these symbols are?" I asked, trying to push aside the sense of despair creeping in. He stepped closer to the wall, trying to decipher the characters. "I don't know," he replied, running his hands over the inscriptions. "It seems like they're watching us." "This is crazy," Mike said, his voice laced with sarcasm, but I noticed there was a tremor in his words. He was more affected than he wanted to admit. "Let's get out of here." That was when the shadows began to move more assertively, and I saw a movement in the corner of my eye. One of the shadows detached from the depths and began to writhe. It was an indistinct figure, but I could feel its presence, as if it were reveling in our suffering. "What was that?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide as she looked toward the dark corner. "I don't know, but we need to stick together," Jake insisted. But the pressure of the darkness around us was intensifying. I could feel my heart pounding out of sync, and the anguish began to fill the scene. The voices that whispered around us seemed to grow louder, each addressing us with our deepest fears. "What are you afraid of, Tyler?" a hissing voice echoed from the walls of the well. "Do you really think you're strong enough?" Tyler looked around, confused. "This isn't real," he shouted, but doubt was evident in his voice. The shadow before him contorted, taking on a distorted version of himself, laughing at his insecurities. "I'm not you," Tyler yelled, but the figure just laughed louder. "You're weaker than you think, Tyler." "You always have been," the shadow replied, and I could see the anguish forming on his face. "Stop!" Emily shouted. "This isn't real. It's just a trick." But it was hard to believe it was all just a trick. The environment was becoming oppressive. The shadows were starting to close in, as if they wanted to swallow us whole. I needed to act before someone got completely lost. "We need to focus," I said, trying to keep calm. "If we unite, we can fight this." "Fight what?" Sarah's voice trembled, and I saw her, terrified, looking at a shadow forming behind her. "I can't face this." "You're not alone, Sarah," I shouted. "We're together." But the atmosphere was changing rapidly. The voices started to turn into screams, and I saw the shadow approach Sarah, taking on the form of her missing sister. Sarah's gaze filled with pain and confusion. "No," she screamed, falling to her knees. "I didn't look enough. I didn't do what I was supposed to." "Sarah, no." Jake tried to reach her, but the shadow blocked his way. It was as if an invisible barrier was between them. Hashtag, you did what you could," I said, trying to reach her. "You need to face this." The shadows were spreading, each morphing into a distorted version of ourselves. Emily stepped back as she watched the shadow of her ex-partner form before her, a malicious grin on his face. "You're nothing without me, Emily," the figure mocked. "You need me to be someone." She recoiled, tears streaming down her face. "No. I'm stronger than you think." But the shadow surrounded her, trying to pull her closer. I wanted to scream, but the weight of fear was suffocating me. The visions were separating us, and all we could do was fight against what each of us was facing. The atmosphere grew heavier, as if the well was feeding on our insecurities. "Jake, what are we going to do?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to find a way out." "I don't know, but we need to unite somehow," he replied, his expression mirroring the internal struggle I felt. It was as if the well was feeding on our weaknesses, and each of us was about to be lost. I looked at my friends, each battling their own shadows, and realized we could no longer stand still. We needed to face this together. "Let's gather together," I suggested. "We need to form a circle. If we're strong together, we can confront whatever this is." "And what if it doesn't work?" Mike asked, desperation evident in his tone. "And what if it does?" I retorted, feeling a wave of determination. We need to try, for them. For us. As we moved closer, I noticed the light from the well beginning to flicker, almost as if it was reacting to our determination. Sarah's shadow, still kneeling, looked up at us, and for the first time, I saw a spark of hope in her eyes. "You're right," she said, taking a deep breath. "I can't let this control me." Together, we began to position ourselves, forming an improvised circle, and I felt a different energy forming around us. The shadows hesitated, as if sensing our union was a threat. "Let's go," Jake said, his voice stronger. "We need to scream, we need to assert ourselves." And so we began, each shouting what we had achieved, who we were. I closed my eyes, trying to push away the visions that tormented me, and focused on my voice. "I am Jake," he shouted. "And I am not afraid." "I am Emily," the girl shouted, her voice stronger than ever. "And I am more than you think." "I am Tyler," he followed, and his distorted shadow seemed to hesitate. "I am not weak." "I am Sarah," her voice echoed, and I could see her sister's shadow starting to fade. "I am stronger than my past." "And I am Mike," he joined our voices, and the shadows began to twist, as if in agony. "I am worthy of love." The words started to intertwine, and I felt a pulsating energy surround us. It was as if our cries transformed into a shield, pushing away the shadows that tried to envelop us. The well was beginning to tremble, as if writhing under the pressure of our unity. "Together!" I shouted, feeling the strength of friendship envelop us. "Together we are stronger." And in that moment, I realized we were changing something within ourselves. The shadows began to disappear, and the light emanating from us grew, like a beacon in the darkness. But at the same time, a part of me knew this was just the beginning. The well still held its secrets, and the struggle was far from over. The air at the bottom of the well of shadows was thick, almost tangible, as if the darkness itself was trying to swallow us whole. I looked at the faces of my friends, and the light that once shone in their eyes was now overshadowed by anxiety and fear. Each of us had faced terrifying visions, revealing the secrets we had tried so hard to hide. I felt the weight of guilt in my chest, a pressure that seemed unwilling to subside. Jake, always the leader of the group, was trying to rally everyone. He looked visibly shaken, but his determination was admirable. "We need to unite, guys. This isn't just about getting out of here, it's about facing who we truly are." His voice echoed in the silence of the well, but there wasn't the same confidence that he usually exuded. He turned to me, concern in his eyes. "Emily, are you okay?" I forced a smile, but I knew it wasn't convincing. "Of course, Jake. I just need a moment." The truth was, I was battling my own shadow, the figure of my ex-partner that still haunted me. All I wanted to do was run away, but I knew I couldn't. Not this time. Sarah, who had been silent until then, finally broke the veil of tension. "We need to talk about what we saw. What's happening to each of us, this isn't normal." Her voice trembled, and her eyes were watery. "I can't stop thinking about my sister. Did I do enough to find her? What if I failed?" The mention of her missing sister made my heart race. I knew how much that pain consumed her. "Sarah, you can't think like that. You did everything you could. No one is blaming you, except for yourself." I moved closer, trying to offer some comfort, but the truth was I was also wrestling with the guilt that was crushing me. "But what if all of this is my fault?" Tyler interjected, his voice heavy with insecurity. "I can't stop thinking about how I could have avoided this. I could have done more, I should have been stronger." He looked at the ground, and I could see the shadow that followed him, a distorted version of himself mocking his weaknesses. "Tyler, that's not true." Mike, who had been quiet until now, stood up, his tone strong and resolute. "No one is perfect. We all have fears and insecurities. The question is how we deal with them." We can't let these shadows dominate us. Exactly. Jake nodded, encouraging Mike. We need to support each other. Remember what we are together. We're a team, and we've faced worse things than this. A team, huh? I looked at them, the idea of being united with them gave me a bit of strength. But that wasn't enough. What I saw on the walls of the well, the inscriptions and symbols, reminded me that facing my own demons was something I would have to do alone. But what if the shadows we're facing are parts of us that we can't just ignore? Then we need to confront them, Jake replied, his gaze firm. I can't lead if I don't know how to deal with what's inside me. And each of you needs to do the same. The atmosphere was charged with tension, but there was a thread of hope beginning to form between us. Sarah, I said, looking directly into her eyes. You're not alone. We're here, and we're going to face this together. Talk about your sister. What do you feel? She took a deep breath, and I could see her hands shaking. I feel like I should have done more. I should have looked harder. I should have tried harder. Part of me wonders if she's still alive, and another part fears that I've given up on her. You didn't give up on her, I affirmed, trying to convey sincerity in my voice. You did what you could. What you feel doesn't make it any less real or less important. You can still honor her, and that might mean facing what you feel. The expression on Sarah's face began to shift. A small flame of determination appeared in her eyes. You're right. I need to face this. I need to remember her as she was, not as the shadow she became. That's it. Mike smiled, and the tension began to dissipate a little. Just look at your memories, not at the pain. You can do this, Sarah. Jake then turned to Tyler. And you, my friend? What are you feeling? He hesitated but finally spoke. I don't feel strong enough. Looking at my reflection, all I see are my flaws. Sometimes, I feel like I'm losing control of everything. Tyler, you are stronger than you think, Sarah said, with an encouraging look. We all face insecurities. ####, remember how many times you've been there for us. You are a loyal friend. And that matters, I added. What you see as weaknesses are parts of you that you need to embrace. We all have our insecurities. We can't let them define who we are. He looked at us, and a small smile began to form on his face. I don't want to be a burden. I want to be strong for you, and for myself. You're not a burden, Jake said firmly. You're part of our team. We're going to face this together. The conversation began to flow naturally, and even though darkness enveloped us, there was a light starting to shine within each of us. The truth about our fears was revealing itself, and acceptance was the first step. And you, Mike? I asked, turning to him. What are you facing? He hesitated, his lips pressed into a line. I feel like I'm losing the chance to get closer to Emily. The shadow I saw, it was the rejection I feel when I look at her. I don't know how to deal with it. The tension in the air became palpable again. I knew the situation was complicated. Mike, you don't need to be perfect. Love isn't just about being reciprocated. It's about the connection you feel. You should embrace that, not be ashamed. But what if I'm not good enough for her? He shot back, frustration evident in his voice. How can I compete with the guys she's already been with? I feel so small next to her. That's exactly what the pit wants you to feel. Jake exclaimed. We can't let these shadows make us feel less. Love is complicated, but you need to be honest with yourself. And Emily needs to know that you care. You're right, Jake, Mike agreed, a new spark in his eyes. I want to be honest with her. I want her to know I'm here, no matter what happens. The air was starting to change. The shadows surrounding us seemed less threatening, almost as if they were retreating in the face of the light beginning to shine in our hearts. I felt the tension dissipating, and a new strength was being born among us. Let's decipher these inscriptions, I suggested, looking at the marks on the walls. Maybe there's a clue about how to move forward. Yes. Let's do it, Jake agreed. We need to find a way to turn this pain into something positive. We need to confront our shadows and free ourselves from them. And with that, we began to crouch down, studying the inscriptions. What had once seemed like a tangle of symbols was now starting to become clearer. The words seemed to call to us, as if they were a guide in our journey of self-discovery. As we deciphered the messages, I realized we were all together, more united than ever. The strength of our bond was manifesting, and even in the face of shadows, there was a light beginning to shine. We were more than the fears that haunted us. We were friends, and together we could face any challenge. With each word we deciphered, a new understanding formed among us. The struggle against our fears was becoming more than just an individual challenge, it was a collective journey. And I knew that, no matter what the pit of shadows still had in store for us, we were ready to face whatever came our way. The darkness around us seemed to pulse, as if it were alive, and the pressure increased with every passing second. I looked at the faces of my friends, each reflecting a mix of fear and determination. It was as if the atmosphere of the pit was trying to separate us, but there was one thing that still united us, our friendship. The echo of our voices still resonated against the damp walls, but the reality was that we were lost in a maze of shadows and uncertainties. We need to face this together, I said, trying to muster courage. But the truth was that I was also being consumed by fear. What I feared most was that what I carried inside me was deeper than any shadow surrounding us. My eyes met Emily's, and I could see the internal struggle reflected in them. Let's support each other, I continued, trying to convince both them and myself. I don't know if I can do this, Emily replied, her voice trembling. What if I'm not strong enough to face what's waiting for me inside? I could feel her hesitance, and it hit me like a blow. I didn't want her to feel this way, but I was unsure if I could face what was about to come either. You are stronger than you think, Tyler said, encouraging her. We need to confront our shadows, and it starts with you. He had always been the most optimistic among us, but even he seemed a little shaken. I knew that we were all struggling with something, and I couldn't let fear take control. Come on, everyone, I said, trying to uplift the group. Let's face this together. If you all can do it, so can I. The words came out of me like a prayer. I wanted to believe them, but the truth was that I carried a weight I didn't know if I could leave behind. One by one, we began to confront our shadows. I'll go first, Sarah said, her voice firm despite her fear. I need to do this. She stepped away from the group, and I watched her anxiously. I wanted to run to her and hold her, but I knew this was something she needed to face on her own. As Sarah moved away, a heavy silence fell over us. I looked at Mike, who was pale and nervous, and then at Tyler, who was watching me with a look that said, "What do we do now?" The pressure increased, and I wondered if I had made the right decision by trying to lead. Then, Sarah's vision began to manifest. She stood still, her eyes locked onto something invisible to us, but clearly terrifying for her. No. Please, no, she screamed, dropping to her knees, tears streaming down her face. I couldn't do anything. I didn't look for her enough. I wanted to run to her, but something held me back. It was as if an invisible force was keeping my feet planted on the ground. Sarah, you can't let this consume you. I shouted, but my voice sounded distant, like it was echoing in a tunnel. You need to face this. You are strong. I knew she needed to hear that, but I also knew the shadows inhabiting that place were relentless. It was then that I realized I was losing myself in my own thoughts. I wasn't just watching her suffering, I was feeling an enormous weight in my own heart. I had my own shadows to face. I looked at Jake, who was paralyzed, watching Sarah with an expression of despair. He was struggling with something, and the doubt in his eyes mirrored my own. Jake, you need to do this too. I said, trying to pull him back to reality. He blinked, as if waking from a nightmare. We need you. He looked so lost, but still, the strength within him began to shine. You're right, he finally said, his voice steadier. I will face this. For Sarah. He turned, and the shadow of his betrayed friend appeared before him. It was a distorted figure, a caricature of what he had lost. Jake's expression twisted in pain, and I could feel his internal struggle. I'm so sorry, he whispered, his body trembling. I never wanted this to happen. The pain in Jake's eyes was palpable, and I wanted to scream at the shadow, but I knew that would only weaken him. Don't listen to that. I shouted, but he seemed deaf to my plea. You're not weak, Jake. You are strong. You overcame this. The atmosphere was thick, and I knew this battle was not just his, it was ours. We needed to confront our shadows, no matter how terrifying they were. I am not weak, Jake finally said, his voice rising and becoming clearer. I am not you. And with that, he stepped forward, confronting the shadow of his guilt. The cruel laughter began to dissipate, and there was a new light in his eyes. I will be strong for myself, he declared, and the shadow started to retreat. I felt the atmosphere around us beginning to change, but Jake was not the only one who needed to confront his shadows. Hashtag. I felt the weight of my own struggle closing in. Then it was my turn. The shadow that manifested before me was a distorted version of myself, a figure that reflected every insecurity I carried. You'll never be good enough, the shadow whispered, and I felt a chill run down my spine. You'll always fall short. No. I am not you. I shouted, but the figure only laughed. You know I am the truth. You are weak. You always will be weak. Tears welled in my eyes, but I couldn't let myself be consumed by them. I am not this, I whispered, trying to convince myself. You can change this, I told myself, but the shadow merely looked at me with disdain. Face your insecurities, Jake. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be you. In that moment, I realized that the only way to overcome this was to accept who I was. I am more than my weaknesses, I declared, feeling a new strength rising within me. I am more than you. I am my own being. The shadow hesitated, and I sensed that I was gaining power. I will not be dominated by you. And with a cry of liberation, I lunged forward. The shadow began to fade, losing strength as I accepted my insecurities. I am Jake. I am strong. I am more than this. The words echoed off the walls of the pit, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me as the shadow dissipated. When I finally returned to the group, I saw that everyone was confronting their own shadows and grappling with their struggles. The atmosphere was shifting, and the darkness seemed to lose some of its power. There was a new light in our eyes, a fresh determination. We did it, I said, a smile forming on my face. We faced our shadows. Emily was by my side, and I could see that she had also found her strength. The fear that once consumed her now seemed to have dissipated. Thank you for reminding me, she said, holding my hand. I needed to hear that. And in that moment, I knew that our friendship was our greatest strength. We supported each other, and together, we had faced the darkness that threatened to swallow us. Let's keep going, I said, looking at the determined faces of my friends. We still have a lot to face, but together, we can overcome anything. The darkness was still there, but now there was a light inside us that could not be extinguished. I felt as if a massive weight had been lifted from me. My sister's shadow had disappeared, and a wave of relief enveloped me. What had once seemed like an unbearable burden now transformed into a lightness I had never expected to feel. I looked around and saw Sarah's dazed expression, reflecting a mixture of pain and liberation. I don't know how this happened, I murmured, trying to find the words. But you are free, Sarah. You did what you needed to do. She looked at me with tear-filled eyes, but there was now a spark of strength in them. I could see that the guilt and regret that had consumed her were beginning to fade away. I never thought I could face this, she admitted, her voice still trembling. I always thought that carrying this weight was the only way to keep her memory alive. It's not, I said, more firmly than I felt. You will honor her by living fully, not by clinging to what could have been. Sarah smiled, and for the first time, it seemed like she was truly seeing herself. It was as if the shadow of her sister had been a thorn in her heart, and now that thorn was being removed, leaving space for healing. Meanwhile, I felt my own shadow beginning to dissipate. What I had carried for so long was finally being confronted. And as I looked at the group, I saw that we were no longer just friends lost in a pit. We were a team. Each of us battling our own demons, but now united in the quest for liberation. Then, when I looked at Mike, I could see he was dealing with something similar. He had always been a bit reserved about his feelings, especially when it came to Emily. He was there, listening to our conversation, but his gaze was distant, as if he were watching a movie he couldn't understand. "Mike," I called, and he turned to me, his face puzzled. "What's going on with you?" He hesitated. Then he took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into deep waters. I've always felt inadequate. Like I was never good enough, he began, his voice heavy with emotion. Especially in relation to you and Jake. And, of course, to Emily. I felt like a burden. Emily, who was nearby, turned to him, her expression a mix of surprise and concern. "Mike, you were never a burden," she exclaimed, the sincerity in her voice echoing off the walls of the pit. "You've always been there for us, always been a loyal friend." He shook his head, as if he couldn't believe her words. "But every time you all were together, I felt like I didn't belong. Like I was watching from the outside." He looked at me and Sarah. And now, here, facing these shadows, I realized that was just an illusion I created. "You are more than that, Mike," Sarah said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You are part of us. Part of our group." The connection between us felt stronger than ever. The shadows surrounding us were beginning to fade, and the light of truth was finally filtering into our insides. "We need to face this together," I said, feeling the urgency growing within me. "Each of us has to fight against our shadows, and we will be here for one another." Emily nodded, her determination unwavering. "Let's do it together, then. We need to do this, not just for ourselves, but for those we love." With every word, every declaration, we felt the strength of our unity growing. It was as if the bonds that tied us together were more powerful than any shadow trying to tear us apart. "I don't want to feel this fear anymore," I declared, almost in a whisper. "I want to be free to be who I am, without worrying about what others think or feel." "You are strong, Jake," Mike said, and for the first time, his voice was filled with confidence. "And we all are. It's time to leave these shadows behind. Then let's do this," Emily exclaimed, her passion illuminating the darkness around us. "Let's face our shadows and free ourselves." Feeling the energy building among us, I closed my eyes for a moment. The darkness around us began to feel less oppressive, as if it were hesitating, fearing the power we were about to unleash. "Each of you," I began, looking into the eyes of each friend, "has to do this for yourselves. I can't fight for you, but I can stand by your side while you confront your truths." Sarah was the first to take the initiative. With a resolute look, she stepped away from the group and turned to the wall of the pit. "I accept the pain of loss," she declared, her voice echoing off the walls. "I accept that I cannot change the past, but I can live in the present." A soft light began to emanate from her, and I saw the shadow of her sister pull away, as if being drawn away. "That's it," I encouraged. "Keep going." Mike stepped forward next, and I could see the determination in his gaze. "I accept that I am enough," he said, his voice steady. "I don't need anyone's validation. The shadow trailing him hesitated, then began to fade. That's it. I shouted, feeling the group's energy surge. Next was Tyler. He looked a bit nervous, but soon steadied himself. I accept my insecurities, he declared, his voice growing stronger with each word. They do not define me. The distorted shadow that had been following him also began to retreat. Come on, Tyler. Emily cheered, and the energy between us was almost palpable, like an electric current coursing through our bodies. Finally, it was my turn. My heart raced, but determination swelled within me. I accept my guilt, I declared, my voice echoing in the pit. I am not responsible for everything that has happened. The shadows surrounding us began to twist, as if being pushed away. I could see the light starting to seep in, breaking through the darkness. ####, I am more than my past. I continued, feeling the strength of everyone around me supporting me. I am worthy of love and friendship. The darkness around us began to dissipate, and I saw the inscriptions on the walls illuminated, revealing a truth we could not ignore. Together. I shouted, feeling the energy of all of us unite. Together. Echoed Emily. Together. Repeated Sarah, the light growing around her. Together. Mike and Tyler joined in, their voices merging with ours. The light intensified, and I knew we were doing something powerful. The shadows were retreating, screaming in pain as we stood firm, united in a single purpose. We're getting out of this. I shouted, feeling the emotions bubbling inside me. And at that moment, I realized that true strength didn't come from facing our fears individually, but from being together, supporting one another, and accepting our weaknesses. The light was growing, and the darkness was receding. The pressure in the air felt palpable, like a weight crushing me. The darkness around us was almost oppressive, and I could feel the shadows dancing on the walls of the pit, threatening to swallow us whole. We gathered in a circle, and I looked into the faces of my friends. They looked paler than I remembered, and the eyes that were once full of life and laughter now reflected the terror we were facing. The battle against our shadows was about to begin. We need to unite, Jake said, his voice trembling but determined. He had always been the strongest among us, but now, his insecurity was evident. If we don't do this together, we won't get out of here. Emily nodded, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. I could see she was struggling against her own shadow, a figure from her past that was consuming her. Tyler was silent, staring at the ground as if trying to avoid the gazes that would reveal his weaknesses. Sarah, on the other hand, appeared visibly shaken, but there was a determination in her eyes that I had never seen before. What should we do? Mike asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. He looked as lost as I felt, but there was a spark of hope in his eyes. What do the inscriptions say? We need to face our shadows, but we also need something more, I said, trying to gather the ideas swirling in my mind. We need to believe in each other, we need to support one another. The strength of friendship is what brought us here, and it's what will keep us united. Jake took a deep breath, and I could see the light of leadership beginning to shine within him again. Then let's go. Let's remember what we've overcome so far. Let's fight together. The tension in the air heightened as we realized that the darkness around us was stirring, as if waiting for the right moment to strike. The shadows began to twist, and I could hear threatening whispers, as if the very pit was mocking us. I looked at my friends' faces and saw that we all felt the same, fear and uncertainty were consuming us. We need to connect, Emily said, her voice now firm. Let's unite, one to another. We are stronger this way. I reached out and grabbed Sarah's hand, who was beside me. She looked at me, and a spark of determination shone in her eyes. Jake did the same with Mike, and then Tyler. We formed a tight circle, our hands intertwined, and the energy between us began to pulse. The darkness seemed to hesitate, as if being pushed away by an invisible force. Let's go. I shouted, feeling adrenaline surge. We need to recite the words. The inscriptions on the walls began to glow in response to our unity, and our voices echoed in unison. "Face your shadow," we said together, and the darkness around us seemed to hesitate for a moment. "We are stronger together." The pressure increased, and I could feel the shadows trying to infiltrate our circle, attempting to pull us apart. But we weren't going to give up. I remembered all the times we laughed together, the adventures we had, and the hardships we overcame. That memory was the fuel we needed. "Remember who we are," I said, my voice now stronger. "Remember why we're here. We can't let ourselves be defeated." Jake shouted, his voice echoing through the darkness. "We are friends, and that is stronger than any shadow." The visions began to intensify, the shadows contorting into distorted figures of our deepest fears. I saw the figure of my father, the disapproving look that always haunted me, and the image of my lost childhood, moments I could never reclaim. But instead of recoiling, I took a deep breath and affirmed. "I am no longer the scared child you made me think I was." I shouted at the shadow. "I am stronger now." Around me, the others were facing their own shadows. Emily stood tall, confronting the figure of her ex-partner, the expression on her face a mix of determination and pain. "I'm no longer your victim," she screamed, and the shadow began to unravel, the figure twisting under the force of her voice. Tyler was battling the distorted version of himself, and I could hear his cries of pain and confusion. "You are not who you think you are," he said, his voice resonating with a growing confidence. "I am who I choose to be." The shadows began to stir, as if being forced to retreat. The power of our union was manifesting, and we were starting to gain ground. The glow of the inscriptions grew brighter, and I could feel the energy of friendship pulsing between us, like a beacon of light in the darkness. "Together," I shouted, and we all joined in, our voices rising in a collective shout. "Together we are stronger." The shadows began to twist frantically, and I realized that the darkness was starting to pull back. The pit trembled beneath our feet, and I could feel the walls vibrating with our energy. "Don't let doubt in," Jake yelled, his voice resonating powerfully. "Remember what we've overcome, remember who we are." The light began to intensify, and the inscriptions on the walls shone with an almost blinding brilliance. I closed my eyes for a moment, allowing the light to envelop me, and when I opened my eyes again, I saw the shadows dissolving, as if they were smoke in the wind. "We're almost there," Emily shouted, her voice full of hope. "Let's go, together." We shouted in unison, reciting the words of the inscriptions, and the darkness began to dissolve, revealing a lit path before us. The shadows that had once surrounded us now seemed weak and powerless, and I knew we were about to win. "We can't stop," I said, feeling the energy vibrate in my bones. "Keep going." The shadows began to dissipate, and the light emanating from us seemed to be breaking the darkness into pieces. A sense of relief and freedom began to fill my heart, and I knew we were on the verge of overcoming this challenge. "We're in this together," I shouted, and the light intensified even more, enveloping us in a radiant glow. The pit began to crumble around us, and for a moment, I was mesmerized by the beauty of the scene. When the light finally reached its peak, I felt a wave of warmth and security wrap around us. The shadows, now powerless, began to disappear, and the pit we were in was filled with a feeling of peace and liberation. "Now is the time," Jake shouted, and we all united in one final cry of unity and strength. The light shone so brightly that I could barely see, but I felt we were about to break the chains of darkness. The darkness finally began to recede, and we remained together, hand in hand, ready to face the unknown that awaited us. The power of friendship had saved us, and now it was time to discover what lay beyond the pit. The darkness around us was starting to fade, but the tension still lingered in the air. The well, which had once seemed an insurmountable cave, now trembled beneath our feet, as if it were aware that its strength was being challenged. I looked at the faces of my friends, each reflecting a mix of determination and fear. Jake, with a steady gaze, tried to encourage us, but I could see the insecurity still dominating him. "Come on, everyone. We made it this far," he said, his voice echoing off the damp walls of the well. "We need to stay united. Remember what we've overcome together." The memory of the shadows that haunted us, the secrets we revealed, and the truths we faced made my heart race. I was no longer the same person who had descended down here. There was a strength within me that hadn't existed before, a force that now pulsed in sync with the beats of our hearts. "Jake, what if we can't make it?" Emily asked, her voice trembling but with a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "What if the darkness won't let us out?" "We can't think like that," Mike interjected, his expression fierce. "We've already faced what we fear. Remember the shadows. They're nothing more than reflections of our insecurities. We can overcome them." I felt a tingling of courage course through my body. Mike was right. What we were facing wasn't real, it was merely a manifestation of our fears. We needed to unite, just as the inscriptions on the walls of the well indicated. The words we had deciphered spoke of the strength of friendship, and that's exactly what we needed now. "Let's recite together," I suggested, looking at each of them. The words from the inscriptions. "If we become one, maybe the darkness can't touch us." Everyone nodded, and we formed a circle, our hands interlocked. The darkness around us seemed to writhe, as if preparing to attack. The cold intensified, and the menacing shadows danced at the corners of our vision, but we couldn't let that shake us. "Please, let's do this together," I said, my voice trembling yet determined. "On the count of 3, everyone. 1, 2, 3. I accept my weaknesses," I shouted, the first to break the silence. "I accept that I am afraid, but I won't let that control me. I accept my guilt," Jake exclaimed, his voice vibrant. "I'm not perfect, but I'm willing to learn from my mistakes. I accept my pain." Sarah joined in, emotion overflowing in her tone. "I can't change the past, but I can live for the present. I accept my love, even if it's unrequited," Mike declared, sincerity in his voice touching all of us. "I am stronger than that. I accept who I am," Tyler concluded, determination etched on his face. "I am not weak. I am human." As each of us spoke our truths, the shadows around us began to scream, as if wounded by our words. The glow in our hearts seemed to intensify, and the inscriptions on the walls began to shine with a golden hue, as if responding to our strength. "Together, we are stronger," I shouted, and everyone echoed in unison. "Together, we are an unbeatable force." The shadows began to writhe, and I saw a light starting to emanate from our circle. It was a warm and welcoming light that quickly expanded, illuminating the walls of the well and making the shadows retreat. The air was charged with electricity, and I felt a wave of energy coursing through my body. "Look!" Emily exclaimed, pointing to the center of the circle. The light was becoming so intense that it felt almost tangible, as if we were creating a portal to freedom. "Let's go. Keep it up," Jake urged, his voice now filled with fervor. "We're almost there." The darkness began to fade, but there were still remnants of shadows writhing around us. We needed to stay united, more than ever. The light intensified, and we could feel the pulsating energy between us, as if the words we were speaking were giving life to something greater. "Let's recite again," I suggested, and at that moment, we all began to repeat the words we had spoken before, but with even more strength. Our voices intertwined in a powerful chorus, resonating against the walls of the well. "I accept my weaknesses. I accept my guilt. I accept my pain. I accept my love. I accept who I am." The shadows began to scream, a cacophony of distorted voices echoing in our ears, but their words no longer affected us. We were beyond that. The warmth of the light was almost unbearable, but it was a good feeling, a sense of freedom enveloping us. "We're almost there," I shouted. One more time. Together. Once more, the words flowed from our lips. The light began to expand even more, enveloping us completely, and I could feel the presence of the shadows retreating, as if being consumed by the brightness we were creating. Let's go. Now. Jake shouted, his voice merging with ours. 1, 2, 3. I accept my weaknesses. I accept my guilt. I accept my pain. I accept my love. I accept who I am. With a deafening roar, the darkness began to dissipate, and the light exploded in a blinding brilliance. I felt as though I was being pulled not just away from the well, but towards something much greater. It was a feeling of liberation, a relief I didn't know I needed. The shadows screamed, and the darkness completely dissolved, like a shadow fading at dawn. The light enveloped us, and for a brief moment, I felt we were all connected, not just as friends, but as a single entity, a united force. Then, in an instant, everything began to calm. The brightness softened, and when I finally managed to open my eyes, I realized we were back on the surface. The fresh air of a summer afternoon enveloped us, and the sunlight illuminated our faces, warming us like a hug. We did it, I murmured, still dazed. I looked around, seeing the relieved faces of Jake, Emily, Tyler, Sarah, and Mike. We were together, stronger than ever, and the feeling of victory was palpable. "We're alive," Tyler said, his voice trembling with emotion. "We really did it." "Yes, we did," Jake agreed, a wide smile lighting up his face. "Nothing can stop us when we're together." But as we celebrated our victory, a shadow of doubt began to form in my mind. What else could we have faced? What did it really mean to have conquered the well? For now, though, I pushed those questions aside. We had overcome something immense, and that was what mattered. The darkness had been defeated, and the light had prevailed. "Sure. Please provide the text you'd like me to translate, and I'll be happy to assist you."